Hey everyone, welcome back to the Leadership Project with your host Mick Spears. Our vision is to inspire all leaders to challenge the status quo. We bring you weekly topics and thought-provoking guests to get you to stop, reflect, and think about what it means to be a leader in a modern world. Our aim is to help you become the leader you wish you always had, as we learn together and lead together. Today's episode is brought to you by my new book, You're a Leader, Now What? The Proven Path to High Performance Leadership. The book contains many of the great lessons that we've been learning together during the Leadership Project podcast, together with many other lessons that I've collected over my 30-year career as a leader. The book is aimed at first-time leaders, but really there's lessons in there for everyone. It would be greatly appreciated if you could go and grab your copy on Amazon as either an ebook or a paperback, and if you could leave us an honest review on Amazon. Now, on with the show. Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Leadership Project. I'm greatly honoured today to be rejoined by our first return guest. We're joined today by Irial O'Farrell, and you would remember her from episode 29 of the Leadership Project podcast. Irial is the founder and principal of Evolution Consulting, but she's also the best-selling author of 3 books. And her books are The Manager's Dilemma, which we spoke at length at in episode 29, Smart Objective Setting for Managers, and Values, they're not just for the Office Wall Plaque. All 3 books are great. All 3 books have got a wonderful message in them. So you have heard from Irial before. If the fans of the show that have been following since we started, you would remember that her episode was really thought-provoking, really talking about this manager's dilemma issue where someone is coming to you with a question where you're sure that they know the answer, but for whatever reason, they're now asking you because you're their boss or you're their manager, etc. And it's about how a manager might break that dependency. I don't want to unpack her entire book in the introduction, but you would remember that we went into great detail during the episode about what the manager's dilemma was about and giving practical advice to managers out there about how they might break that for the growth of the team and also for the growth of them as individuals and to achieve better results for that matter as well. That then has stimulated a lot of discussion between Irial and I, but then also out there, people are always talking about their leadership versus management. And somehow the term manager ends up being the poor cousin of leader. This podcast is called the Leadership Project Podcast because we're driving people to be better leaders. And somehow we get into a lot of LinkedIn debate, a lot of debate in different groups where somehow the term manager ends up being the poor cousin and somehow seen as being less than. But the honest truth is we need both. We need leaders and managers. So today we're going to unpack that a little bit. You're going to hear a little bit of bias from me. I have a tendency to prefer a leadership style than a manager style. And Irial is here to say, well, come on, we actually need managers and this is why we need them, and maybe address some of the misnomers or the misconceptions out there about what it means to be a manager. So that's the scene setting. Without any further ado, what I'd like to do today, Irial, we've already heard from you before and our audience know who you are, but it's been many months. So tell us what's happened since the last time that you're on the Leadership Project podcast, and say hello to the audience and let us have that update.
Well, hi, Mick. Thank you so much for being the first person back onto your podcast. I thoroughly enjoyed our last discussion, which, if I remember correctly, it ended up at 2 podcasts. It must have been 29 and 30.
It was indeed. It was two episodes because it was a long discussion, but a very fruitful one. Yeah, very good. Yeah.
It was. And as part of that discussion, that whole kind of where's the relationship between management and leadership came up. So with that, I think that was kind of sparked our conversation about me returning to the podcast. and unpacking this rather fascinating topic. So I suppose I'm in terms of the books and in terms of what I've been doing. Since we last spoke, the Manager's Dilemma has been going extremely well and was picked up by Get Abstract as they did their abstract summary treatment of the book, and is available on their platform. So that was very thrilling, I have to say, to get that. I also worked through the process of recording the audiobook for the Smart Objective Setting. So that is now available on Amazon and other audiobook sellers. And that was an interesting project in itself. I lost my voice during it and all sorts of things, and Christmas got in the way. So went on a lot. There was learnings, definitely. I know the next time I'll definitely be a lot faster at getting through the recording of it, better prepared. And then I am starting to get ready for getting the next book in my performance development series around feedback ready. So I've kind of started looking at the title and the cover and things like that. But I need to start getting, hopefully over the summer, start kind of carving out a few hours a day to start getting through the writing out the content of it. I've kind of got it mapped out, but a bit more work on that to go.
Tell me more about that one. I wasn't aware that you're working on book 4. What's going?
I've been keeping it quite low key at the moment, but
everyone knows now.
Yeah, exactly. So I suppose in terms of the order of the books that I wrote, well, the first one, the values book, I wrote in 2011, published it in 2012. So that was sort of the very first book, and that was the one that grabbed me at the time. But initially I was going to write a book on performance development, performance management, and it wasn't quite coming to me. So I ended up doing the values book. And then in 2020, when I started writing the next book, I was like, right, I'm ready to write the performance one. But it's actually such a huge area. I think it's underappreciated how huge an area performance development is, that I don't think it's given the respect that it deserves by HR, by the organization as a whole, and by managers specifically. And so actually, when I was writing the first book, I knew I wanted to write the Manager's Dilemma, but I kind of needed the context for it, which I felt was the Smart Objective Setting. And that really is the start of, if you're developing somebody, is the what is it you expect of them, which is what goal setting is, really. And then the next one was the Manager's Dilemma, because I just think it's such a huge issue, that the challenge that so many different managers at different levels of organization struggle with, that I just felt it needed to be written, needed to be out there. But then the next part is, you've done all of that. How do you give effective feedback? So the next obvious stage of performance development is giving effective feedback in a way that people can hear it. And that in itself is an art form.
I can't wait for it, Irial. I'll be really open with you here. This is a weakness of mine. So to show complete openness and transparency, I know that giving feedback, particularly constructive feedback, I have a kind of mental block with it. It's hard to describe, and we could get into a therapy session right here now to try and discover why, but we won't do that. But I do struggle when I'm very good at giving praise. So when praise is deserved, I never miss opportunity to give praise. But I do struggle with starting those more challenging conversations. And it's really interesting because I myself thrive on feedback, and I believe that feedback is a gift, and it enables you to uncover blind spots, and you can't do anything about something that you're not aware of. So it builds great awareness and all this kind of stuff. So it's an interesting one for me that I thrive on feedback, and yet when I go to give someone some kind of constructive feedback, I get nervous, and I'm not a nervous person. I'm a very confident person. I'm not a nervous person, but for whatever reason, I can procrastinate, and procrastinating never makes it better. So cannot wait for that book. And I've just shared with the world that I'm not good at giving constructive feedback, but that's life. All right, so we're going to dig into this leader versus manager thing. And we did discuss this a little bit in episode 29, but I want to level set it again, because this is this podcast and people might be listening to this granularly and want to know, what is your definition of the difference, Irial, between a leader and a manager?
So this is a great place to start, isn't it? So to me, management is about the process of understanding what needs to be done and achieved, and potentially put the framework plan in place, resources in place in that, and to ensure that the right work is done at the right level, at the right times, at the right cost, to contribute to the business's objectives and goals of the business. And leadership, to me, is are we doing the right things? So I would often use the I think it's Stephen Covey, but correct me if I'm wrong, around the manager is the one arranging the painting of the house. The leader is ensuring it's the right house we're painting, or the forest. We're knocking down the forest. Is it the right forest? So the leader is more looking at, they're looking more, to me, I describe it, and in my mind, I see it as looking up and out. What is going on? How is the business doing? What's going on in the outer context of the business, and the context, the environment in which the business is working on? And are we still doing are we still focused in the right direction? Whereas the leader, once that decision has been made, the manager role then is to go, right, now that we've made that decision, as that's the direction we're going in and that's the vision we're working towards, let's put together the plans and create the teams and put in place the resources to make it so.
Yeah, okay. All right.
So I see them as two parts of the same process, actually.
Yeah, okay. All right, so if I play some of that back, so the leader would be responsible. You didn't use this word, but I could see it coming through, the vision of, okay, this is what's on our horizon, up and out. I like that up and out word that you used. But the manager is actually looking, okay, how are we going to do that? How are we going to navigate these waters? Who's going to do what? When are they going to do it? In what order? All of these things. So, and I think it becomes clear at this point that you do need both. Let's put that right on the table, that you need that leader that's going to be inspirational and have some vision of the world that no one else has seen, that can create that picture that rallies people and go, oh yeah, that's the world I want to be part of. But to actually do something, you need to then have a plan, have a manager who's going to be a little bit more concrete and get things done. And if I could go out there and say, a vision without a plan and without action is just a dream, and a plan without vision is maybe not meaningful and doesn't have direction and doesn't change the world. And maybe I'm a bit too altruistic with that I'm always looking to improve the world, but a plan and action without vision is directionless. How does that sit with you?
Well, I would agree with you, but what I would say is that without direction is the status quo.
Yeah, okay.
So you actually just end up with the status quo. So if your business isn't changing and you're in a very stable and static environment, which, let's face it, none of us can remember that time, but say the 1950s, where it was all going tickety-boo, where it was all quite stable and all quite static, and things changed maybe over a 10-year period as opposed to a 10-month period these days. You didn't necessarily need as much leadership because the world wasn't changing that much. And so you didn't need to reevaluate your vision, and you didn't need to check in with it, and you didn't need to redirect it. So you could do a lot more. You had roles for a lot more managers to go, keep doing what you're doing because it's working. We are doing well. We're doing, I'm just thinking, for some reason, Ford and the car industry in the US is just springing to mind. But there was a golden period where all they needed to do was just keep doing what they were doing. So long as you had the people trained up and you had the rotas done and you had the production lines working tickety-boo and all that kind of stuff, whatever, you didn't really need a vision. But when it got into the 80s, the 90s, 2000s in particular, I remember there was a big shift because in the US in the 90s, I remember going to the US and it was all American cars. And 2 or 3 years later, there was an awful lot of Japanese cars. And all of a sudden, the American car industry was seriously challenged. And it was, where are we going to position ourselves? And then they needed leadership. So if you're not dealing with an awful lot of change, then management is more than enough, because it's just around doing what you're doing, staying with the status quo and getting it all out the door, whether that's products or services. But if you're in a very volatile, a very changing world, then you need an awful lot of leadership. But then, so we obviously, these days, we need an awful lot of leadership. So we can see how, even because of the world that we're in, why the leadership is the sexy cousin of the two.
Yeah,
because we need it an awful lot more, because there's constant change. But the trick with that then is, how do you get the value out of those changes? How do you get the value out of the vision? Because what happens in some industries and some companies, some organizations, is they are constantly maybe chasing the next shiny thing and the next fad and the next and they go, we're going to position over here. And they never build out the infrastructure. They never build out the capabilities or the plan, put the plan into action to realize the benefit of that. And then they're changing again. So leaders like that, while they are constantly pivoting, they are using up huge resources of the business and never getting the value out of them.
Yeah, correct. Okay. Yeah, very good. I like these reflections. I want to play back a couple of things and add something as well, which was, you said that leadership is more important now because the world is changing more rapidly and the change cycles have dramatically increased. And I'm not just talking about COVID. I'm talking about, in general, the world now changes at a pace that is unprecedented. I would just add that and say that if your organisation wants to change the world, wants to be the change in the world, you also need visionary leadership at that point. So it's either adapting to a changing world or being the change that is driving the world. You need visionary leadership there. But then...
I would just add to that, that's a pure visionary leader.
Yeah, right.
That's your blue sky, your blue ocean.
Yeah.
Like, I just see the vision, and they're very rare.
Yeah, there you go. Okay. And we'll come back to the rarity of some of these skills shortly, I think. But then if your visionary is someone, I'm going to say, we're going to create some stereotypes here. These rare visionaries may actually have 64 ideas per day, right? And without a manager coming in or a management mindset, because it may not be a different person, but without a management mindset, none of those will see the light of day. They will just be philosophical discussions, and wouldn't it be great if? Well, how about we do the if? And you're also right that you could churn a hell of a lot of resources chasing shiny objects and not pay the bills because you didn't actually produce anything of value.
Yeah. Yeah. Or pay the dividends to the shareholders, depending on the size of the company.
Yeah,
but
sure.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, very good. So on this skill set thing then, do you think it's possible for someone to be both leader and manager, or are we better off with leaders and managers joined at the hip? Two different people with different skill sets, different mindsets. What's your reflection there?
I think it's a really difficult question for companies to square away, and partly because the role of manager tends to be a more senior role. Like, there's frontline management, which is your team leaders, and that's relatively keeping the lights on kind of stuff, whatever. That's the kind of managing of the typical the day-to-day doing of whatever the business does. And then you get into, 2-3 levels up a manager. So your managers at those levels are typically, they're responsible for the management, but they're also seen as leaders. So typically the hat of manager, or the role of manager, and the hat of leader, or role of leader, tend to sit in the same row. And this is quite often not very clearly articulated by companies and not understood very clearly either by the organization as a whole and the people in these roles. So without really thinking about it, most organizations expect senior people to be both manager and leader, which makes it really difficult. And I've had many conversations with managers, leaders on leadership development programs over the years that I've delivered to people. And we have these conversations around, is every manager a good leader? And is every leader a good manager? And, there's definitely a difference between, people are kind of going, well, actually, oftentimes a good manager isn't necessarily a good leader. So they can differentiate between the two. And similarly, you can have somebody who's a very good leader, but tends to not be very good at the management side and kind of leaves it to other people. So in my experience, and I'd be really interested if people, people listening to this came back to you and kind of said, well, actually, I've got an experience where the organization has roles that are designed purely for leadership and then purely for management. But in my experience, most organizations don't separate the roles out.
Yeah.
You have to add an awful lot of value, where you might get it. And even then, I think most people who move into these senior roles struggle with actually the differentiation between the two. You may get it as a sort of a well-established organization that has put in a CEO that is very much the face of the organization and very much is freed up to do a lot of the leadership stuff. But even for a lot of organizations, the CEO is often, or the managing director, whoever the leader is often kind of drawn into the day-to-day running of the business. So you need to be very, if companies are going to do it, they need to be very strict about it.
Yeah.
And I think there can only be so many of these positions created in organizations, because you have to be adding a huge amount of value. You're going to, the person, the incumbent in the role has to add a huge amount of value in terms of their leadership and their visions and the turning them into gold, so to speak, for the organization to value the creation of the role in of itself.
Yeah, you've got me reflecting a lot there, Irial, on a few things. The first one is I think if we did a job board search for the word manager, we'd get countless counts, right? So there's huge numbers of people that have manager in their title, and then they have manager in the title, and then they get asked the question, where's your leadership, right? So you've got to show leadership. I think if we did a search on leader, you'd get some team leaders, you'd get some of those, but the hits would not be as many. So I think the job title leader is not so common. The job title manager is common. And then those managers are expected to show leadership skills and leadership attributes. That's interesting. If I think about my own career, I'm going to say I made a transition along the way. And I was a manager. And I would say when I look back, and including if I read a book called The Manager's Dilemma, I can recognize lots of mistakes I made as a manager. And those mistakes were probably leadership mistakes, right? I now pride myself on being a leader and being a visionary and painting that picture of the world that we want to create. And I think all of my team that are listening to this call, including previous teams that I've led, would very be quickly whispering, yes, but he's not a very good manager, because that's not something I focus on anymore. I don't focus on the what. I don't focus on the what anymore. So I just focus on the why.
Why, yeah.
So I think I've made a shift, and I don't think I am a good manager anymore, but I am a good leader. And I was once a better manager, not brilliant, but I was once a better manager who probably had a lot to learn about people leadership.
Yeah. And the thing is, in your role in the leadership project, that's appropriate that you're the leader, that you're showing the way, and the idea is to kind of create a team of people around you that can turn your ideas into reality. So that's where the management should sit. The other challenge is how much leadership do you need? And this is where a lot of times when you do leadership development programs with different levels of people in an organization, and I've done one where you've done it with like the CEO and the executive team right the way down to the team leadership, the team leads and that kind of thing. But they'll talk, we need leadership, and it inevitably comes up around to what degree at the different levels do you need leadership? And so it isn't, because you want your leader, your top team, your leadership team, your executive team, you want them deciding what game you're going to play, because that's ultimately their responsibility. What game are we playing with this business? Are we playing rugby? Are we playing tennis? Are we playing soccer? Are we playing? Because those are the fundamental decisions that have to be made at that level as to which market are we playing in, which products or services are we going to offer. So that's what I mean about which game are we playing. So they define the game. And then within, and they might go into kind of like, and here's the kind of the overall strategy we want to play this game. Okay, we might have some strategic decisions we need to make in order that we can play this game properly. But then they expect the functional heads to kind of go, now you need to take that. We've given you that the game that we're playing and the strategic decisions that goals that we're trying to achieve playing that game. Now you need to create your own vision as to how your function is going to work with all the other functions in order for us to deliver that. So you need it at those levels. And then it becomes less important because now you've decided you've defined the game that we're playing, the strategic goals of the game and what we want to achieve with it or whatever, right? And you've kind of said, now the forwards we're going to play, where we go with American football, Australian rules, Gaelic football, I don't mind. The forwards.
Yeah, 60% of our audience are from the US and Canada. Irial,
Let's go with American football.
I say that with great respect because I love rugby. I'd love to talk about rugby, but they won't get it. So most of them won't get it. That was my own bias coming through there. Let's talk about American football. Yeah.
Well, we won't even talk about American football. We'll talk about American and Canadian. If you've got a lot of Canadian audience as well. Yeah. So I know the games are quite similar, but there are differences. But you've got your forwards, you've got your backs, you've got your specials or whatever. So really what you're kind of saying there is like the head of function of the forward. What's your strategy in order to support the overall strategy of the game that we're playing? With your experts, what's your strategy? How are you going to break that down into your experts, and when are you going to bring them on, and what do you want from them? And then the backs similarly. So what you're kind of saying is like within that, it's kind of saying, okay, we need to have a vision for each of the roles or the functions within the organization and how they're going to work together to contribute to achieving this vision. And then you've got your senior managers who need to understand that and to need to kind of go, are we aligned in the right way? Are we designed to do that? What do we need to do differently? And then so you need leadership, but you're making it smaller and smaller in some ways, and it needs to be aligned with the overall. And so a lot of times there's a requirement for leadership, but to the extent of the leadership, it depends on the level that you're at in the organization and the degree to which you're going to play a role in that leadership.
So I see where you're going with that, and I want to break it down a little bit further as we go down. So I see where you're going with that with vision. I see where you're going with that with purpose. So the CEO, or sometimes I think Simon Sinek uses the term CVO, Chief Visionary Officer, is setting that ultimate vision of the business and maybe a little bit of strategic framework. Not the strategy, but strategic framework. Here's the playing field that you're going to play on. Off you go and play, right? And then the different functional departments or the different teams then have a purpose to go, here is my purpose, here is my vision, and this is how I contribute and my team contributes to the parent vision and the parent direction and the parent purpose of the organisation. And it could be down to, I run the finance department and my purpose is to make sure that we are never a choke point for the growth of the business because of our ability to do accounts payable and accounts receivable, whatever the case may be. So understanding purpose and meaning at the granular level and how it contributes to purpose and meaning at the higher level. So completely with you on all of that. What about then people leadership? So not about the vision now, but about inspiring people into action. And if I share a thought, and this is the beauty of diversity of thought. You might not agree with what I'm about to say, and please have open license to share your thought. One school of thought, the difference between leaders and managers, is that a leader inspires people into action because they wanted to do it, whereas a manager might just tell people what to do.
So, this is a excellent question and an excellent point to consider. And in terms of over the years, 20 odd years that I've been studying management and leadership and the differences and the similarities and the crossover and the roles that they play and all that good stuff. In my making sense of it all, I have identified that there are two for sure, maybe three. Off the top of my head, I can't think of it, but I think I have identified a third one. Two skills for sure that cross over between leadership and management. Okay. So there's a huge amount of skills that are associated with management, and there are a huge amount of different types of skills associated with leadership. And the two that I kind of go, they cross over. One is motivation and motivating them. So I don't see it as an either or. I think motivation and inspiring people is a skill of both management and leadership. And I think if you're doing the day-to-day stuff, you need to connect people to the why they're doing it. And you need to, and whether that's because this is what we do and we need to produce this for the CEO or whoever it is, whoever, if we take the financial statements piece, or we connect them through to the why. So I see that as as important as a manager getting the work done as it is around getting people excited about the future vision.
Okay, all right, very good. So let's continue with that. I think this is making sense. So a more universal skill set that a manager and leader needs is the ability to motivate. And we talk about leaders being inspirational, but motivating people into action is good. And I think about, I've been doing a lot of research into Glass's choice theory, and the choice theory, the underpinning argument is people want to feel like they have their hands on the steering wheel of their life and that they make conscious choices in everything that they do. The freedom of choice and the freedom from oppression. There's all other needs like survival, love and belonging, power, fun, but freedom is one of those, and freedom to make choices and freedom from oppression. And whether you're a manager or a leader, people want to feel like they made a conscious choice to follow you.
That they want to stay working with you. Yeah. And we'll follow you if you follow every leader, but manager, I suppose it's the leadership thing. The follower isn't necessarily seen as important in management, but people stay with a good manager. They leave a bad manager, they stay with a good manager. To me, a manager isn't just getting the work done. And this is where I probably diverge a little bit from an awful lot of the stuff that I've been reading about the management piece. To me, like a good manager, and this is where it starts getting, that gray area between management and leadership. To me, a good manager is to manage people well and to manage the work well. People need to be able to do their jobs. They need to be empowered to do their jobs and to get their work done and to be developed and to be kind of all that, right? So that they can deliver the work at the right time, to the right standards, at the right cost. Because if stuff is done wrong and has to be reworked, there's a cost to that. So that's what I mean by at the right cost. It gets done once, per the process, rather than having to be redone or escalated up and done at a higher level, and then the costs escalate hugely, as we know from Manchester's Dilemma. So to me, a manager almost has that vision for their people, to develop their people, to empower their people, to enable their people, to help them see where their career goes, to help them see where their capabilities are and that kind of stuff. And one might almost kind of say there's an element of that kind of practicing the visionary part of leadership within the team and within the developing the team and where this person can go and where their potential can bring them, and how does the manager develop them up. And I'll just go back a little bit. You mentioned around that we were talking about the leader and the manager telling, the leader inspiring, the manager telling. that telling style, that to me is and it was some of the narrative around manager and leadership is almost like it's the same thing, it's just a different style, where the leadership is an inspiration and the management is a telling. And to me, they're totally different functions. They play totally different roles. They largely have different skill sets. They play different roles within the organization. And even within, as we've already talked, within the leadership, there are different roles of leadership as there are different roles of levels of management. But to me, a manager's style can be coaching. A manager's style can be telling because there's a crisis and it needs to be done. A manager's style can be affiliative and all about the friendship and the relationships and the feel-good factors. So there are different styles. And those styles are as equally, one could probably say they're as equally relevant to a manager as a leader. One of the exercises that I do is I take different styles and kind of go, when would you use these different styles? When should you not use these styles? And interestingly, inevitably, the telling style, people always feel, oh, there's always this sort of, oh, tush, we'd never use the telling style. But, and say there's a positive, oh, yes, the coaching style, it's all about the coaching style. So people intuitively know that. But actually, a huge amount of it is to do with the situation and the appropriateness of the style to the situation. So if you always use the coaching style and you're in the middle of a crisis, you're going to drive people nuts. They're just going, just tell me what to do. Just tell me the decision. Give me the direction. If it's a crisis, you want somebody who goes, you do this, you do that, you do the other. And they will respond because they know you have their best interests and they have, because the trust is there. And if you always use it. So the thing is around, if you always use that style, then you're getting into the telling. I'll tell you what to do. I'm the boss. You just do it. The finger wagging. But if you're only using it at the appropriate times, then it's highly effective. But equally, if you always use coaching, it becomes ineffective. So the thing with leadership and management is a huge part of, and maybe actually this might have been the third capability. I don't know if it's so much a skill, but it's the ability to flex. And it's the ability to be aware of your situation, aware of the surroundings, and have a toolkit and to know which tool to use at which time.
Okay. So we've got different styles for different situations. And I love the analogy you used about crisis management, because this is when we do want leaders or managers, whatever label you want to give them,
exactly.
You want someone they're going to step up and they're going to go, right, this is what we're going to do. We'll do a debrief later as to whether this is the right path, but we need action now, and this is what we're going to do. So there's a time and a place for that very directive style. So different situations, and this requires situational awareness. It requires a level of emotional intelligence as well to be able to determine which style is appropriate at different times. And if I remember, I'll share a story about something I did with one of my teams to break that, because my style is naturally coaching, and it did get to a point of frustration for the team. I'll share that in a moment. All right, so we've covered both leaders and managers need to motivate people. You've said that the why is important, and we think that why is somehow the ownership of the leader, but it's not. The manager also needs to know why a certain task is being done. You spoke about empowerment, and then you spoke about different styles. Let's get to this empowerment one. I think this one's really interesting, and I think there's a balance here, right? So we pay people a lot of money. Some people in the audience will be arguing and saying, oh, I don't get paid a lot of money. But let's say that we take resources of the company and we pay people a good salary, and we employ them because they've got a certain skill set, they've got a certain experience that they're bringing to the table. One of the balancing issues is, why on earth would you pay someone who's skilled in their profession a lot of money and bring them in and then tell them how to do their job? That's one end of it. And then I think the balancing element that I would like your view on this balance is, but if you just let it to chance and went, okay, I'm going to employ 50 people all with their unique skill sets and then sit back and watch what they create, well, then you've got chaos, and you've got no cohesion. You don't actually create anything again. So the balance is between paying someone for their skill set and then bringing them in and then telling them what to do every day, why would you pay someone so much money if you're then just going to tell them what to do every day? Versus if you don't give a lot of direction, you might employ 50 experts in their field, but they all go off and do their own thing and there's no coherence in what they build.
Yes. So if you bring them in and just leave them, and I suppose this is the piece around the what are we trying to achieve here, which is, again, whether it's coming from the manager going, here's the plan of what we're trying to do and here's your role in it, versus here is the here's the vision. Now create the plan and come up with it, and and tell me what you're going to do, whatever. But I need to yay or nay it. And some of it is, so some of that comes down to whether. I mean, there's all sorts of things that get into that around how decisions get made, and is it consensus or is it directive or is it a consultation? So you might kind of go, well, we want you to do that, but we still want to have some level of insight or oversight or control over what it is you're suggesting that we do. But also it's to what degree have the plans been created and designed and ready to go? And are they coming in to implement it, or are they coming in to create it? So, and again, a lot of times in the recruitment process, people aren't that clear around where's the boundaries on that. Some of that goes on. But also, so I was saying about that there's an assumption there about that the person is fully competent in the particular role that you're bringing them in to do. And that may or may not be true. So there's both their style of it, but there's also to what degree are they a good fit?
Yeah, good. Okay. And
with the roles that you're bringing them in.
And I think the other elements of the balance is like, so you're making sure you're taking advantage of their diversity of thought, diversity of experience, make sure you're listening to them, make sure they feel like they're valued, make sure that their opinions are heard, all of these things. And then balancing that with the plan, which is making sure that the actions that they do are moving the ball down the road towards the goal, right, or down the pitch towards the goal, to make sure that the actions that they're doing are not inconsistent with the actions of the rest of the team or duplicate. You said before about using the right resources for the right task and all of these things. So it's that coherence is where the plan comes in to make sure that there's congruence in what everyone is doing. Yeah, it's really... I promise to come back to the story about the leadership styles. So I am now 100% a coaching style, and I have to make a conscious effort to be not a coach, if that makes sense. So I've got to tell you this story of a marketing team that I was leading in a business I was working with shortly. I'll name it Cubic. And with the team there, I got so much into coaching mode that I was a point of frustration for the team. And we worked this through, and we ended up coming up with an approach for this. So they'd come to me with all kinds of things, and I'd instantly go, what makes that important to you? And what positive impact do you think would come if we manage this? And I'd go into asking more questions than you could ever imagine. And sometimes they just want to know, am I going to use a blue font or a black font for this one? And by the way, it's going to the printer tomorrow. I just want to know the answer. So I'm exaggerating only a tiny bit, but exaggerating a little bit. So what I gave them the license to do is to tell them, hey, my natural style is a coaching style. And if you come to me with any problem, my coaching hat is going to come on. But I give you license to come to me and say, Mick, we just want you to call the ball on this one. We've got a milestone approaching. Sometimes we just want an answer. And they had the license to raise the flag and do that. So anyway, different styles, different times, right? And your point before about crisis management was perfect. All right. The other one I want to pick on here is in this argument, debate, discussion that we're seeing in the world, leaders versus managers, how much of it is a misnomer? And it's not really about leaders versus managers. It's about good leaders and good managers versus horrible leaders and horrible managers. And where the confusion comes in is not whether they're a leader or a manager. It's whether they are a horrible boss or a great boss. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's a definite nail on the head there, because that comes down to we're kind of getting back to styles there. A lot of it, if somebody's style is very directive or telling or very, it can grate after a while. And I do think some of it comes down as well to what's interesting. I think some of it comes down to the title of the role, because again, we've talked a bit about this, that most senior roles are, where you've got people reporting into you, are called manager roles rather than leadership roles. And so managers themselves often identify as the manager, not necessarily as the leader. But sometimes some organizations, they'll call them the leadership team, or they're the leaders, or they're the leadership team, and so they try and bring that language in. But oftentimes the individual, some leaders I would kind of go, no, they're senior managers in positions of leadership. They're not really leaders, because nobody is really following them. They're acquiescing. So this is the part of the I suppose the challenge with organizations. You have senior people who are often promoted because of their technical ability rather than their leadership or their people skills or their management skills or any of those sorts of things. And that can go really, really high up in organizations, that people are, in effect, they're individual contributors in really senior positions, and they don't really see themselves as a leader or a manager. But people have bills to pay and mortgages to pay and rent to pay and food to put on the table. And so they kind of go along with the poor quality of management and or leadership that gets displayed on a regular basis that they're having to deal with, because they have to acquiesce, because sometimes it's the devil you know is better than the devil you don't. So they're not particularly good, but it could be worse, or they're in quite a niche role or a niche industry in where there's not an awful lot of companies to choose from, and so it's very hard to change roles or change companies, that kind of stuff. So I think this whole, what some of it is that the language of some organizations kind of insisting that somebody in a senior position is really a leader, and everybody is looking up at them going, wouldn't follow them to the shop, let alone anywhere else, but because they don't have an awful lot of choice, they acquiesce to it. And so people start thinking, well, this must be what a leader is. Because they're looking and they're going, well, I wouldn't choose to follow them. And not necessarily that people are consciously going through all of these explicit thoughts that I'm sharing here, that they sort of intuitively know, kind of, I wouldn't rate him or her, but I don't have an awful lot of choice, so I have to go along with it. And so I think that some of the language that gets used, some of the, I suppose some of it comes down to the poor quality of who gets promoted and the lack of taking it seriously that companies do. And so they put people in because they get stuff done, but they don't really care about how they go about it. They just, so long as it gets done. And so they end up with people who are in these senior positions, whether they're called managers, whether they're called leaders, and people are looking up and going, yeah, it doesn't inspire me. It doesn't, it doesn't really look particularly good to me, but I don't really have an awful lot of choice. So I'm just going to have to put up with it.
Cool.
Until I can find an alternative.
So there's two major themes that I'm picking up from this one, and there's some lessons in there for all of us, I think. Technical prowess and even IQ are not good indicators as to whether someone's going to be a good people leader. It's their EQ that is a far greater indicator, and I think Daniel Goleman has proven that as well. Like, it's twice as important as IQ and technical prowess is the ability to be emotionally intelligent. And we do end up in a situation. Here's the call to action for HR leaders out there. I shouldn't just pick on HR, but organizations in general. Do you have a remuneration scheme that recognizes those powerful individual contributors that are horrible people leaders, or maybe don't even want to be a people leader, and they take leadership roles because of the extra pay, and they want to put a roof over their head and food on the table? So do you have, and I'm by the way, I'm aware of at least two companies that have good schemes like this, and I'm sure there's more, but I'm aware of at least 2 companies. Thales has a good one. IBM has a good one, where there's technical streams where you can continue to get promoted and salary increase without any people leadership, and you're just recognized for your immense technical ability, right? So there's at least 2 companies that I know that do it, but I'd say that most don't. And people want recognition, they want increased salary, they want all of these things, and the only way that they can get it is to take people leadership roles that they may not be a good fit for. They may not even enjoy it. And when you're not enjoying it, you don't do it multiplies, you don't do a good job. So that was the first. You want to comment on that, and then I'll go to the second one.
Yeah, well, I think a lot of times, so I would agree with everything you said, and organizations do struggle with this. And this is when you get into org design, it's how far up can you go with those technical individual contributor roles, and give them the high value, the higher pay rises and the status of them. And it can be done, but I think there are certain roles that allow it happen an awful lot more, because when you manage a group of people, your value to the organization increases. You can produce more as an individual because you can leverage your team to produce more.
Multiply your impact.
You multiply, exactly. You get a multiplier effect that is a lot harder to do when you are an individual contributor. So you have to create that multiplier effect in different ways. So if you had somebody like, say, for myself or yourself, if we're enabling managers and leaders and individuals to perform better, we get a multiplier effect, because the work we do makes a multiplier effect. And if you are, let's just say you're in technology and you are a programmer for a product that is going to be sold for million, whatever the revenue is going to be off of it or whatever, you can command a higher price because your value, you have a multiplier effect on the value that you bring to the organization. And that's where organizations can often struggle with how do we decide which of these rules, or how do we decide which of these roles are going to be that have that multiplier effect that we can justify paying these higher salaries, versus ones that we can't. And the likes of IBM, if you take them, obviously they're a massive, massive company, so they can afford a certain number of senior level individual contributors, and they can afford the cost of it. But for other organizations, maybe they can't. Whatever, it's like, I still need to get the work done, and we're still going to need to get a manager in or whatever, so we're still going to need to put somebody in there. But also, I would just say as well, like, a lot of times people they're not developed up properly, so maybe they did have the potential to be a decent manager.
They just missed the opportunity. Yeah, they weren't shown how to be a leader. Yeah,
exactly. We left them to it and hoped for the best. No, it didn't work out, didn't it?
And I'll come back to that one with my second point, which is about culture and learned behaviour. I'll finish on the first point, and you got me in a deep reflective state there thinking about that. It is more conducive to certain roles, I think, this ability to have this technical stream where people can continue to rise and continue to get pay rises. And the 2 things that they can do in that field, and I'll think about Thales and I'll think about IBM again. So Thales, there's an example of one guy went on to win a Nobel Prize for physics because he invented a new technology called GMR, which makes an Apple iPod and an Apple iPhone, all of these things possible. So an underlying technology, he invented something that then is patentable, that can then make the company a lot of money. So there's the invention side, the patentable invention side that generates revenue for years to come. And the second one is I'll use the word carefully now, mentoring of junior people coming through in technical skill, not in people leadership, in technical skill. And this is the IBM fellow. So the idea of an IBM fellow is someone that mentors people on their craft. They're not people leaders. They mentor people on their technical craft. And yeah, you're right. It means that this idea of having this different stream, it lends itself to more of the technical fields, unfortunately, which means maybe this is something to think about going forward as to how it could be applied in other job families. All right, come to the culture now. So you mentioned about that maybe they were never shown what it means to be a leader. They were never given good training on people leadership skills. They went through university, they learnt their craft, they started their job, they did OJT on the job training on their craft. They've spent all of their time doing their craft, and then they get tapped on the shoulder and say, great, you're brilliant, you're now a leader, but no one has shown them what it means to be a leader. So now their only reference point is to start looking around them and looking at what other behaviours are happening, and that's hit and miss. And they'll be looking for three things. What behaviours here are rewarded? What behaviours here are tolerated? And what behaviours here are not tolerated? And that will determine what they do as a leader. And they'll start mimicking the behaviours that they see are either rewarded or tolerated, and they'll avoid the behaviours that are not tolerated, right? How's that sit with you?
Yeah, absolutely. And ultimately, an organization's culture comes from the people at the top, because ultimately what happens is everybody in the organization looks up the line and goes, what gets rewarded? What gets promoted? What behaviors get promoted? What behavior? Oh, look, that behavior gets promoted. I'll start doing that behavior. So they start doing that and they start reflecting. But of course, that level up is looking up again and up again, depending on how many levels in the organization. So ultimately, everybody looks up and everybody mimics what they see on the hopes of getting rewarded. And so ultimately, and there is no getting away from this, any leadership team that's kind of saying, oh, you know, our culture doesn't work and our culture, then it's kind of like, well, you need to sit around that leadership table and look at yourselves and go have real serious conversation with yourselves as a team and go, what isn't working about this? And that's why it's so important to promote up people for their values and their cultural connection with the organization, because if you don't, you end up promoting up somebody who is, or you get what you reap what you sow, kind of you promote somebody up who doesn't demonstrate that, and you get a shift in behavior. And this is where you get microcosms of cultures. So you've got you'll have the broad culture, but in this particular function, everybody knows that's a different culture because the person who's leading it or the senior manager, team lead, or whoever it is, they have a different approach, and they somehow they've gotten through, or so, again, and it's very easy to get through. It's very easy for organizations to not take the promotion of people aligned with the culture. And what you often see is, and they do it at the senior levels, you see it with the CEO coming in, they go external for a CEO or a head of function or whatever, and they come in and they don't pay any attention to the culture and the leadership side, the cultural side of things and the values, and is it connected and all that kind of stuff. And they come in and they have a totally different approach and totally different style. And within months, the culture is destroyed.
Yeah, exactly. And
people are leaving left, right, and centre.
And this is the pivotal point, right? So you're going to have a healthy culture and healthy behaviours, or you're going to have a toxic culture and toxic behaviours. And it all comes down to either the reward or the tolerant, whether you tolerate it or not. And I use the word tolerate because sometimes it's turning a blind eye. So sometimes it's rewarding and going, yeah, well done, you did a great job, and everyone goes, really? They did a good job? Right? Or other times it's just tolerated, where a blind eye is turned to inappropriate behaviour. And then people have almost a binary reaction to that. When a inappropriate behaviour is tolerated, people will either go, well, okay, I can do it too then. If that person did it, I'll do it too. Or they go, I cannot believe that was tolerated here. Where's the door? I'm out of here. Yeah. Right? So, and before you know it, you've got a runaway toxic behaviour or a toxic culture. Yeah.
Yeah.
Really
absolutely.
Interesting.
And it can happen so quickly.
Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly. So what's rewarded, what's tolerated, what's not tolerated, and those little decisions, including whether it's, like I said, turning a blind eye, it's going to have major ramifications on the culture of your company. Yeah, very good.
And you often get it in because people are technically good. They're again, going back to what we promote people because they're technically good. They're often technically very good. And because they're technically very good, we will turn the blind eye.
Yeah.
Because we don't want to lose them.
Yeah, exactly.
Or we don't want to have the conversation with, getting back to the feedback, we don't want to have the conversation, because actually a large part of it is because we actually don't know how to frame the conversation. We don't even know how to start that conversation. Kind of, we know what we don't like, but we've no idea why we don't like it, and we don't know what the alternative is, because a lot of that isn't, a lot of the culture isn't articulated, and a lot of the expectations aren't articulated in organizations, and a lot of the expectations are in management and leadership. Getting back to that, people get promoted up and they don't really know what they're told to do. A lot of that isn't really articulated, and so therefore when they do get promoted up, they don't really know what's different about this role to the last role, or what skill sets they're supposed to have or start developing for this role versus the last role. And in the event of not being told anything, they continue doing what they've done until told otherwise.
And that's a huge mindset shift that is difficult but important, is to realize that what's been serving you to get to where you are now won't be what you need to do in your next role. It won't serve you for where you need to go next, right? And that can be difficult. And one of the big ones there that I really feel for people, this happens so often. You turn around and see someone that's been promoted and yet they're somehow still doing their previous job and their new job. And whether that's by expectation or a self-imposed kind of expectation where there's a certain comfort zone or security blanket that they reach back and do their old job as well as their new job, or whether it's an expectation from the company, either way, it's not good. And this is how we end up with people working crazy hours and all these things. Okay. All right. I feel like we've made huge ground here, Irial. I'd like to quickly summarize things that I've taken away from today, and then I'd love you to have the final words. So clearly we need leaders and we need managers. Leaders with a great vision and no action is just a dream. Managers with a plan without a vision is not going to change a world or is not going to adapt well to a changing world. So clearly we need both. That there are some certain skill sets that apply in both. That ability to motivate and inspire people, that ability to empower people, that ability to align and build good relationships, all of these things probably bridge both leaders and managers. That culture plays a huge role in all of this, the behaviors of the organization as to whether leadership and management are going to come together congruently in a way that's cohesive and harmonious for the betterment of the organization. That ultimately then, this debate that we keep on seeing in LinkedIn, which, stick my hand up and say that I've contributed to this debate that leadership is better than management, or no, management is better than leadership, although it tends to be more favoured to leadership these days, is not really about leaders versus managers. It's about good leaders and good managers versus horrible bosses. And what we end up debating is the behaviours of some horrible bosses that have not done a good job. And I'm not talking about people that turn up purposely to do a bad job. No one does that. I'm talking about people that have lost their way, that don't have the self-awareness that their actions are impacting those around them. And I think that's the discussion we need to have, the difference between a great leader and a great manager. It might be one person or it might be two people working collectively versus a horrible boss that demotivates people, makes them, belittles them, all of those behaviors that we don't want. How's my summary sit with you? And I'd love you to have the final word as we close it up.
Great summary. Yeah, no, I would agree with you. And before we came on air, you had said, and you declared it during the podcast as well, that your bias was slightly towards leadership, or was more towards leadership. I'm not sure how slightly it was, but when you said that, I was kind of thinking, what would my bias be? And I kind of thought, I came down. I said, I don't think I come down more either side, because I recognize they both need to be accessed. It's more around accessing them at the right time for the situation, and to have that flexibility. And to be able to have that flexibility, we need to have very clear awareness and vision of what is management at different levels in organizations, what is meant by leadership in different levels in organizations, and how they differ, and to have a framework to develop people up through the skills and the mindset shift, the knowledge and the tools to be able to create that flexibility within organizations. My thing is always around everything I do is around enabling businesses to become more effective in what they do. So I always kind of say, you're going to get to wherever you're going to get to. The question is how far. So some organizations with the same level of resources can get much further than other organizations with the same resources. And so, for those organizations that are wasting their resources, there's such a huge opportunity to tap into the empowering of their managers, their leaders, and as a result, everybody in the organization, that everybody is being empowered if everybody's empowered and everybody is able to do their current role and getting ready for other roles, then the organization itself has an awful lot more agility and flexibility to deal with the changing world that we lead in. And I kind of, in some ways, I've been 20 odd years training and developing and leadership development and all of this. And I think I almost thought for a while there, the organizations had finally gotten the point that we can, people need to be developed, people need to be invested in. And organizations are talking about, the great resignation and all these things. And jobs are getting more complex. Companies are getting more complex. Roles are getting more complex. So it takes longer for people to master their roles. And they're not going to do it spontaneously just by, being given, here you go, here's a computer, here's a manual, you'd be grand. They need to be nurtured. They need to be developed. They need to see how they have a future in the organization. And I just think organizations are wasting huge amounts of resources by not investing in their people at any of the different levels that I've talked there.
Yeah, brilliant. Well said. And that's a great one for us all to think about as we close out today. We normally at this point go into a rapid fire round, Irial, but you've already been through that. So you went through that in episode 29 and episode 30. So I'd like to close out slightly differently today. And I just want to congratulate you on your success for The Manager's Dilemma, for smart objective setting for managers, and for values. They're not just for the Office Wall Plaque. So 3 wonderful books. I look forward to your new book about giving feedback. This is going to be really educational and transformational for me. So I'm very much looking forward to that. And if I can get an advance copy, please, that would be wonderful, because I know that I need to work on that. And then I'd just like to give you the floor at the last point to say, I'm sure that people once again will want to know more about you, Irial, and get in contact with you. They might want some work from Evolution Consulting to help them with these things. How do people get in contact with you?
Well, the website is evolutionconsulting.ie, so you can go onto the website and look at what I do. I work with organizations in terms of their strategy and vision. So, are you clear about what you're trying to do with your organization? Is the organization designed to do that? So I would do org design work. I would do organizational processes like management process design, such as recruitment, performance management, those sorts of things. I then look at developing capability, leadership capability, management capability, and then training and coaching. So there are a lot of the different pieces of work I do, which, as mentioned, all focused in on how do we maximize the effectiveness of the organization and unblock any of the blockages in the system. And one of the things that I've started working quite heavily with organizations are in what I call role dimensions, which is actually building out the frameworks of framework in organizations around how the roles are changing within job families and what the expectations are, and articulating that so people actually have sight of how their roles are expected to change, to provide that guidance, and then they can look at the skill sets that they need to start, I suppose, articulating and making explicit what companies implicitly expect.
Brilliant. All right,
organization.
And we'll put that link in the show notes. So if people want to get access to your services, they'll be able to easily find you. So once again, Irial, it's always a pleasure to talk to you. It's a pleasure to talk to you when we're not doing podcasts. When we're doing a podcast, it brings something richer because we get to share this conversation and your knowledge and wisdom with our audience as well. So thank you so much again. It was a great pleasure to have you as our first return guest. I feel like we need to have at least 1, 2, 3, or even 4 additional episodes with you because I always learn so much every time that we talk together.
Brilliant. It's been an absolute pleasure, Mick. Thanks a million.
Recording stopped.
Today's episode was brought to you by my new book, You're a Leader, Now What? The Proven Path to High Performance Leadership. The book contains many of the great lessons that we've learnt together here on the Leadership Project podcast, together with lessons that I've collected over my 30-year career as a leader. The book is aimed towards first-time leaders, but really there's something in there for everyone. If you would like to show your appreciation for this show, we would greatly appreciate if you were able to go and get your copy of the book on Amazon as either an ebook or a paperback, and if you could leave us an honest review on Amazon. Thank you for listening to the Leadership Project podcast at mixbeers.com. A big call out to Faris Sadek for his sound design and editing of our audio and video content, and to the whole team at TLP, Joanne Gozon, Gerald Calabo, Rika Vidanes, and my wonderful supportive wife, Say Spears, who is also our operations manager. This show would simply not be possible without you. If you've enjoyed the show, please leave us a rating and review at Apple Podcasts. You can catch the video podcast and our video of the week at the Leadership Project YouTube channel, and you can join the conversation at the Leadership Project Facebook community group. We look forward to bringing you more great content and interviews next week as we continue to learn together and lead together. In the meantime, please do take care, look out for each other, and always remember to challenge the status quo.